United Kingdom now, where the G7 meeting is wrapped up with 1 billion vaccine doses pledged by wealthy nations. The group of 7 nations made up of the UK, the USA, France, Germany, Canada, Italy and Japan also invited some non-member countries, including South Africa. Of course, COVID vaccine delivery and global recovery from the pandemic were key topics, but climate change and relations with China also really important matters that were discussed. Let's get the latest from our UK correspondent, Ollie Barrett. Good evening, Ollie. So this 1 billion dose pledge that was expected, it has actually been pledged. Are all the 7 nations in agreement that this should be given?
Well, there's some controversy about that 1 billion number, Sally. It is made up of 500 million Pfizer doses that the Americans are buying. The UK is pledging 100 million surplus doses from its own vaccination rollout, from the doses it's already ordered for itself, and it does have a large surplus. But actually, if you look at the total number of doses in that pledge, it's only 850 million. The rest are made up from funding pledges that would be used to buy vaccines via the COVAX facility. So some campaigners are saying this actually isn't quite 1 billion doses. They're also saying that it's going to take quite a long time to get these billion doses actually into arms in places where people need these jabs the most, in lower and middle income countries. The UK insists that actually it will start distributing millions of doses within the coming weeks, but it does admit that actually the rollout of its 100 million doses will take place over the course of the next 12 months. So it was a pledge that was expected. It remains a pledge that is controversial, the summit having wrapped up with many campaigners saying they needed to do more and more quickly.
So talk to me about the call by the World Trade Organization and spearheaded by India and South Africa to waive intellectual property rights on COVID-19 vaccines, which of course will drastically bring down the cost, will allow lots of different factories to start manufacturing. Who is in favour? Who is not? Is there sufficient political will coming from the G7 to push manufacturers to actually make this change?
But it was very interesting because Cyril Ramaphosa was asked about that at the end of the G summit before he headed off, and he was asked if he was disappointed about the fact that he hadn't been able to come away from the G7 with full support from all of the attending nations for that idea of TRIPS and the patent waiver plan. The French President Emmanuel Macron came out in support. Cyril Ramaphosa thanked Joe Biden for his support on the matter too. Boris Johnson had a bilateral discussion with the South African president, but he does not support that idea. He says that it could harm the future production of vaccines and treatments to go down that path. He says the incentive needs to be retained for vaccines to be something that people do want to develop in future. The UK also points out that it has made sure that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine was produced and is being distributed around the world at cost anyway. So it says that is the major contribution that it's able to make in that regard. One thing that Cyril Ramaphosa did say was that he believes that even though he wasn't able to come away with full support from all the member nations for that idea, he does believe that the mood around the proposal is shifting, that the support is starting to stack up behind it, even if it wasn't fully forthcoming in Cornwall.
All right. Let's move on to climate change, because that is a massive issue as well. There was talk of incentives for those poorer nations who want to migrate to greener energy. Is that something that is seriously on the table? Is it something South Africa might benefit from?
Yeah, that is, it was in the final communique that is exactly what the G7 countries want to do. They want to not just continue to reduce their own dependence on coal power, but they want to help developing nations do so as well with financial incentives, and funding, they say, will be forthcoming to make sure that that can happen. And you're quite right that climate change was a central part of the final day of the summit. Lord Attenborough, the broadcaster and naturalist, he addressed all of the leaders, including the South African delegation that was in attendance for that final day. We did see targets set for lowering carbon emissions from G7 nations. We also saw targets in terms of keeping temperature rises for the planet at a minimum. And what the UK is hopeful about here is that these ambitious targets that they say they have set along with G7 countries will really pick up some momentum now heading towards the COP26 climate change summit that South Africa will be expected to attend also here in the UK in Glasgow in November.
And then finally, South Africa, of course, was invited as a guest. And while all eyes were on Joe Biden, sort of indicating that the USA is back, I'm just wondering if you're able to give us a sense of what sort of impression the South African delegation made at the G7.
I think it's fair to say that on a personal level, it really did look as if Cyril Ramaphosa was getting on incredibly well with all the leaders that he met. There were large smiles on his face, but also on the faces of those he was holding bilateral meetings with. Him and Boris Johnson were laughing uproariously on the beach at Carbis Bay when Cyril Ramaphosa was welcomed to the summit. And a lot of praise for South Africa and its delegation and the role that they played representing really the whole continent of Africa at the G7 summit. The other invited guests were from the Asia-Pacific region, but what the UK wanted to do was to make sure that it invited major democracies from Africa and Asia, so South Africa got the call up in that regard as well. The UK wanted this G7 and so did the US to show that democratic countries can come together and can take meaningful action and also can show unity and strength in the face of perceived threats from, for example, Russia and China.
Well, thank you so much. Ollie Barrett, our correspondent in the United Kingdom. Still ahead.